Do you ever wonder what you would become if you stopped pretending to be harmless? The question drifts through the dim corridors of your mind like a shadow moving against a deeper shadow. It whispers with the dry chill of an ancient conspiracy, something older than morality, older than the excuses people tell themselves to stay weak. The question carries the pulse of a suppressed truth. The world is not a place of fairness. It is a wilderness of ambition where predators rise and the naive are devoured slowly, politely, with smiles painted on the teeth that tear them apart. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this long before any modern philosopher tried to soften reality into something palatable, digestible, or optimistic. He understood what most people refuse to admit even to themselves, that power is not accidentally seized, nor innocently gained, nor harmlessly held. Power is taken, and only those willing to think beyond comfort, beyond rules, beyond illusions, will ever touch it. Tonight you are invited to step inside the mind that saw the world with the cold clarity everyone fears. You will not find comfort here. You will not find kindness. You will not find the soft encouragement of motivational sermons crafted for fragile ears. What you will find is the truth, the kind of truth people spend their whole lives trying to avoid, because once you see it, you can never unsee it again. Once you understand how power is really shaped, molded, sharpened, and deployed, you cannot return to a naive life. The world becomes transparent, people become predictable, motives become visible, and your own potential becomes frighteningly real. Because once you understand what Machiavelli understood, you no longer walk through life blindfolded. You walk with the calm, dangerous confidence of someone who sees the hidden strings being pulled behind every smile, every alliance, every promise, every betrayal. You recognize the invisible architecture of influence, and you begin, slowly, quietly, to build your own. But before your transformation begins, you must step into the darkness willingly. You must remove the thin veneer of politeness that has been stitched across your instincts since childhood. You must strip away your inherited obedience and examine the truth beneath it, the truth you've always suspected, that the world bends to those who dare to shape it. And the shaping of the world rarely looks noble, innocent, or pure. It is an art of shadows, not sunlight. Machiavelli never designed his philosophy for those seeking a peaceful life. He designed it for those who dared to rise, for those who wanted control in a world that constantly tries to make you small, for those who saw that human beings are not equal in ambition, perception, courage, or willpower, and that anyone who pretends otherwise is either lying or blind. And yet, if you listen carefully, beneath the sharp edges of his ideas, there is a strange kind of liberation. Because when you finally accept the darkness in human nature, you free yourself from the illusion that you must be soft to be loved, or innocent to be respected, or agreeable to survive. You begin to understand what he meant when he wrote that people judge by appearances, but only a few see what you truly are. And even fewer have the courage to become what they truly are. So listen closely, because what you are about to hear is not a lecture, it is not a lesson, it is an initiation, a descent, an unlocking. It begins in Florence, in the shifting political storm that shaped Machiavelli's mind, a world of betrayals sewn with silk threads, of alliances forged in candlelit rooms, of power maintained not by virtue but by skill. Imagine the smell of burning wax and cold steel, the echo of footsteps in stone corridors, the tense whispers of men who fear losing everything and are willing to gamble the lives of thousands just to keep their grip on authority. In this environment, idealism was not merely naive, it was fatal. Only those who understood the anatomy of power survived long enough to influence anything at all. But tonight, this story is not about Florence. It is about you. You standing on the threshold of a darker, sharper understanding. You peeling back the layers of your old limitations. You feeling the weight of your potential like a weapon you've never dared to draw. You realizing that the strategies Machiavelli spoke of were never meant to remain trapped in the dusty margins of political history. They are meant for mindsets like yours, mindsets capable of becoming dangerous when awakened. There are moments in life when something inside you shifts permanently, when you see yourself with new eyes, when you realize you have been underestimating your strength, suppressing your instincts, limiting your vision out of fear of judgment or rejection or conflict. But Machiavelli whispers something far more unsettling. If you continue to suppress your nature, you will never understand what you could have become. And so the transformation begins not with loud declarations, but with a quiet recognition. You are no longer interested in playing small. You no longer wish to walk through life unarmed, unaware, unprepared. You no longer want to be the person who wakes up one day and realizes they were manipulated, underestimated, or overshadowed by those who simply had more courage to think ruthlessly. But ruthlessness, as Machiavelli understood, is not cruelty for its own sake. It is clarity, a refusal to lie to yourself, a refusal to pretend that people will reward your goodness, or that loyalty will be repaid, or that honesty will protect you. In Machiavelli's world, which is still our world, people reward what benefits them, not what is moral. They support what strengthens them, not what strengthens you. They follow those who appear powerful, not those who beg to be respected. And so the first invisible principle begins to take shape in your mind, the understanding that power begins with perception, not truth, not purity, perception. Because human beings live in the theater of appearances, they are guided by symbols, gestures, signals, and impressions. They judge strength by confidence, credibility by consistency, dominance by decisiveness. They cannot see your inner qualities. They only see what you project, what you embody, what you allow them to believe. This is why the weak often remain weak. They believe that their hidden virtues should be visible. They think the world should admire their intentions. They wait to be recognized. They wait for opportunities. They wait for someone to validate their potential. But Machiavelli understood what they did not. No one sees your worth unless you force them to. No one respects your potential unless you demonstrate it. No one fears you unless you prove you can act. No one trusts you unless it benefits them. So you begin shaping the way the world sees you, not through deception for deception's sake, but through strategic self-command. You realize that you must become the architect of your own perception, the sculptor of your presence, the guardian of your image. And this is where the second invisible principle awakens, the mastery of emotional distance. For you cannot influence others while being entangled in their expectations. You cannot command respect while being emotionally dependent. You cannot think strategically if you are drowning in the need to be liked, accepted, praised, or forgiven. Machiavelli understood that a leader must cultivate just enough closeness to inspire loyalty, but enough distance to maintain authority. If you are too warm, people assume they can manipulate you. If you are too cold, they revolt. Your strength lies in the tension between accessibility and mystery, but emotional distance is not practiced outwardly first, it is practiced internally. It begins with the decision not to take offense easily, not to react impulsively, not to reveal your fears, your doubts, your insecurities. It begins with self-control so powerful that others cannot read your inner storms. They see only the calm surface, the unshakable confidence, the unwavering presence. Because once people sense emotional weakness, they test it. And once they test it, they exploit it. The third invisible principle rises quietly from this realization, the understanding of human selfishness not as something evil, but as something predictable. Machiavelli refused to frame human nature in romantic illusions. He saw it for what it is, self-serving, fragile, unstable, driven by desire, fear, envy, and ambition. People may speak of loyalty, but they act according to interest. They may praise virtue, but they follow strength. They may appear grateful, but gratitude fades quickly, replaced by new wants, new frustrations, new insecurities. This understanding does not make you cruel, it makes you aware. You stop giving your energy to those who drain it. You stop expecting loyalty from those who have no reason to be loyal. You stop assuming that people will appreciate your sacrifices. You stop offering trust freely. Instead, you begin building relationships based on aligned interests, mutual benefit, and clear boundaries. You become harder to deceive, harder to manipulate, harder to control, not because you distrust everyone, but because you understand everyone. The fourth invisible principle forms in the silence behind these thoughts. The acceptance that conflict is not an interruption of life, it is part of it. Most people fear confrontation, avoid tension, suppress their frustrations until they rot inside them. But Machiavelli knew that avoiding conflict only makes your enemies bolder. Problems ignored become weapons in the hands of those who oppose you. Tensions unaddressed grow into silent conspiracies. The person who fears conflict becomes the victim of those who do not. So you begin to confront what needs confronting, not with rage, not with recklessness, but with precision. You address issues before they grow. You cut off threats before they multiply. You stand your ground when others attempt to undermine you. You stop allowing disrespect to pass unchallenged. And you learn slowly that courage is not loud, it is disciplined. It is the willingness to uphold your boundaries, even when it makes others uncomfortable. And this leads quietly into the fifth invisible principle, the ability to adapt. For Machiavelli understood, rigid people break while fluid people rise. The world changes, alliances shift, circumstances collapse. Strategies that worked yesterday fail tomorrow, and those who cling to a single identity or method or belief system are swallowed by their own inflexibility. Adaptation requires a form of self-erasure, a willingness to discard what no longer serves you, a willingness to reinvent yourself when required, a willingness to evolve without asking for permission. It means letting go of the outdated version of yourself, the passive self, the apologetic self, the fearful self, and stepping into the version that is capable of navigating power with intelligence and precision. You begin to see life not as a fixed path, but as a moving battlefield. Each moment requires a different stance, a different approach, a different angle of attack. You become elusive, unreadable, dynamic. You become someone who cannot be pinned down, predicted, or easily defeated. And here, in the middle of this unfolding transformation, the sixth invisible principle stirs, the understanding of timing. Machiavelli wrote about the importance of fortuna and virtù, the interplay between fate and action. But beneath his words lies a simpler truth. Timing separates the powerful from the powerless. The impatient lose opportunities. The impulsive expose themselves. The timid wait too long and miss their moment. You begin to understand that power is often not about doing more, but about doing the right thing at the right moment. You learn to wait strategically, to observe before moving, to strike only when the odds are aligned. You act not out of emotion, but out of calculation. And when you move decisively, leaving no doubt, no hesitation, no weakness. The seventh invisible principle emerges like a quiet fire, the cultivation of unpredictability. For people fear what they cannot anticipate. They obey what they cannot fully understand. They respect what they cannot control. Predictability is comfortable but powerless. It allows others to map your steps, predict your reactions, exploit your patterns. But when you introduce uncertainty into your presence, you gain psychological advantage. Your silence becomes a strategy. Your moves become deliberate. Your motives become layered. And slowly, people begin to tread more carefully around you, not because you are threatening, but because you are unreadable. They do not know what you are capable of, and that alone shifts the balance of power. And then, finally, almost invisibly, the eighth principle emerges. The willingness to build yourself into something formidable, not cruel, not tyrannical, formidable. Someone who does not crumble under pressure, someone who does not depend on validation, someone who does not dilute their potential to soothe the insecurities of others, someone who understands that power begins within, in the mind, in the spirit, in the discipline that shapes every decision. And as this principle settles in your mind, something shifts. You feel it in the center of your chest, a quiet ignition, a low-burning fire. You feel the weight of your old self breaking away, like armor that no longer fits. You feel your instincts sharpening, your awareness expanding, your confidence building not from arrogance, but from truth. The truth that you are no longer sleepwalking through your life. You are awakening. You are becoming dangerous in a world that prefers you harmless. You are beginning to see with Machiavelli's eyes. And once you begin to see this way, nothing and no one will ever look the same again. There is a moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, when the air around you seems to shift. A moment when you realize you are no longer standing outside Machiavelli's world, looking at his philosophy like a distant artifact. You have stepped into it. You have crossed a threshold you cannot uncross. And now, the world around you begins to rearrange itself, revealing what was always there but hidden behind layers of politeness, pretense, and illusions. You begin to see the machinery behind human behavior. its gears driven not by nobility but by appetite, fear, and ambition. And as this vision sharpens, you understand something unsettling. You have been playing the wrong game your entire life. For the world is not governed by truth, it is governed by perception. It is not shaped by the gentle, but by the strategic. And as this understanding sinks deeper, you feel your old innocence shedding like a dying skin. You feel the slow rebirth of a mind that sees people not as they present themselves, but as they are. It is a clarity that carries both power and weight. Because once you recognize the hidden rules, you also recognize how many years you spent trapped by them. You see how many choices you made out of fear, how many opportunities you relinquished out of hesitation, how many times you silenced your own voice to avoid conflict with those who never cared about your comfort in the first place. But awakening is not regret, it is reclamation. It is the beginning of a new form of intelligence, sharper, more dangerous, more attuned to the currents that shape human life. An intelligence Machiavelli believed very few ever develop, for most prefer illusions that soothe them, rather than truths that transform them. Yet you, now standing in the dim glow of realization, sense something rising inside you, a hunger to understand more, to go deeper, to see the full map of the strategies that have always governed the powerful. Machiavelli wrote not for the masses but for the few, those willing to see the world as it is, not as they wish it were, those who do not fear the weight of reality, those who seek to carve their own path rather than wait for one to be offered. And so, as you step further into his world, you begin to realize that his philosophy is not merely about manipulation or dominance. It is about mastery, mastery of self, mastery of perception, mastery of circumstance, mastery of the invisible forces that guide human behavior. And mastery begins with awareness. You start to see how people cloak their intentions behind friendly masks, how their smiles often conceal calculations, how their praise may hide envy, how their advice often reflects their own fears more than your interests. You notice how often kindness is used as currency, how often guilt is used as leverage, how often vulnerability is used as a tool to extract sympathy or control. And as this awareness grows, you begin to detach, not coldly, not cruelly, but consciously. You no longer absorb every word as truth. You no longer accept every emotion as authentic. You no longer instinctively trust those who claim to have your best interests at heart. This detachment allows you to see subtle dynamics that were once invisible to you. The way someone's tone shifts when they feel threatened, the way their eyes flicker when they lie, the way their posture stiffens when they attempt to assert dominance. You begin to read the unspoken, the hidden, the silent. And once you learn to read people this way, you begin to understand something Machiavelli knew deeply. Human nature does not change. Its patterns repeat, century after century, merely wearing different clothing. Yet awareness alone is not enough. Awareness is the foundation, but strategy is the architecture. And strategy requires a kind of courage most people lack, the courage to act deliberately, to think ahead, to move with intention rather than emotion. In your old life, you reacted. You responded to events as they happened, often too late, often too softly, often without understanding the full consequences. But now, Machiavelli's voice echoes in your mind. Those who do not command their circumstances are commanded by them. You begin to think differently. You begin to anticipate. You begin to see 5 steps ahead instead of 1. You begin to understand that power is not an accident, but a deliberate construction. And this construction begins internally. Machiavelli believed that the greatest rulers were not those born into privilege, but those forged by adversity. Pressure creates clarity. Difficulty builds discipline. Struggle sharpens intelligence. He knew that those who avoid discomfort remain weak, while those who confront it gain the strength others envy. As you move deeper into this new mindset, you begin to reflect on your own life, the moments that shaped you, the betrayals that hardened you, the disappointments that rewired you. You see, with new eyes, that every wound taught you something your comfort never could. Every loss forced you to grow in ways your victories never did. You realized that suffering was not merely pain, it was preparation. A slow, brutal education in human nature, a training ground for the mind you are now stepping into. But if adversity is the forge, then ambition is the fire that keeps it burning. You feel it growing within you now. An ambition that once felt dangerous to admit, as if wanting more was an act of rebellion. Society teaches you to be humble, to be grateful, to be content, because content people do not disrupt the order. Content people do not challenge those in power. Content people do not rewrite the rules. Machiavelli saw through this lie. He believed ambition was the pulse of human progress, the driving force behind every great leader, every visionary, every strategist. Without ambition, a person becomes a shadow of who they could be. With it, they become a force the world cannot ignore. As you allow your ambition to surface, you notice how others react to it. Some become uneasy, sensing a shift in you they cannot explain. Some attempt to pull you back, fearing what your growth means for their own comfort. Some try to soften you, distract you, or guilt you into shrinking. But their reactions only reveal one truth. People fear the person who is becoming too self-aware, too disciplined, too confident, too strategic. They fear the person who cannot be manipulated. They fear the person who thinks independently. They fear the person who stops seeking approval, and you have begun to become that person. It is here, in this rising tension, that you step into the next layer of Machiavellian understanding, the strategic use of silence. Silence, once uncomfortable to you, now becomes a weapon. You observe more, you speak less. You do not rush to explain yourself. You do not reveal your emotions to everyone. You do not fill every empty space with unnecessary words. Silence unsettles people, forces them to reveal themselves. Nature hates emptiness, so do insecure hearts. When you stay quiet, others fill the silence with their fears, their assumptions, their projections. They expose themselves while thinking they are uncovering you. Your silence becomes power. It becomes your shield during conflict, your advantage in negotiation, your anchor during emotional storms. It makes you unpredictable, unreadable, untouchable. People begin to wonder what you are thinking, what you are planning, what you are capable of. And this wondering shifts the balance of power in your favor. But silence alone cannot build influence. Influence is built through presence, an energy that communicates authority without effort, not arrogance, not aggression, authority. You begin to cultivate this presence in small, subtle ways. You stand a little straighter, you speak a little slower, you move with intention instead of haste. You stop apologizing unnecessarily. You stop explaining your decisions to those who haven't earned the right to question them. You listen more carefully. You respond more deliberately. You allow your confidence to fill the room without forcing it. This presence grows not from pretending to be powerful, but from knowing you are becoming powerful. Yet presence must be supported by discipline, ruthless discipline. The kind that Machiavelli believed separated leaders from followers. The discipline to control your emotions, your reactions, your impulses. The discipline to work when others are resting, to plan when others are drifting, to observe when others are blindly moving. The discipline to choose long-term strategy over short-term gratification. You begin to notice your mind strengthening in ways you never imagined. You feel your focus sharpening. You feel your patience growing. You feel your tolerance for superficiality decreasing. You feel yourself craving knowledge, skill, insight, anything that expands your understanding of the world and your place in it. This hunger is not arrogance, it is evolution. Evolution requires sacrifice. To become more, you must release what holds you back. Old habits, old fears, old relationships that comfort you but keep you small. Old ways of thinking that no longer match the person you are becoming. Letting go is painful but necessary. Machiavelli never sugarcoated this truth. Transformation requires cutting away what is weak, unstable, or unnecessary. Only then can strength grow without resistance. As you continue this inner transformation, you begin to see how external power is built, not through aggression but through subtlety, not through domination but through influence, not through force but through foresight. You begin to understand why Machiavelli admired leaders who could bend reality without breaking under its weight. Leaders who could read people like open books, predict their moves, manipulate their narratives, and direct their emotions. Leaders who controlled not just situations, but perceptions. Because perception is the battlefield, and you are learning to command it. Yet, as your power grows, something else awakens, the realization that you must be selective with your alliances. For people are not equal in loyalty, ambition, or integrity. Some will strengthen you, some will drain you, some will envy you, some will betray you the moment it benefits them. Machiavelli believed in the strategic use of alliances, not emotional ones. Alliances built on mutual benefit, shared ambition, and clear boundaries. You begin to form these selectively, cautiously, intelligently. You no longer open your world to everyone. You no longer give access freely. You no longer confuse familiarity with trust. This selectivity does not make you isolated, it makes you sovereign, and sovereignty leads to clarity. Not everyone can accompany you on the path you are choosing. Some will leave, some you must leave behind. Some will cling to the old version of you, refusing to accept your growth. But you continue forward, because leadership requires momentum, and momentum requires shedding what slows you down. Machiavelli understood that those who rise often rise alone before others follow, and you, now stepping into your own power, begin to feel the weight and freedom of solitude. Solitude sharpens you, it focuses you, it trains your mind to rely on its own strength rather than the reassurance of others. It makes you resilient, self-sufficient, and unshakable. As the night deepens around you, as your understanding sharpens like a blade drawn from its sheath, you begin to realize that this journey is not merely intellectual, it is psychological. You are dismantling old versions of yourself. You are constructing a new identity, layer by layer. You are becoming someone who sees the world without filters, without illusions, without fear, someone capable of navigating power with precision. Machiavelli once wrote that fortune favors the bold, not the reckless, not the naive, but the bold. The person who dares to see truth and act according to it. The person who refuses to be intimidated by the chaos of life. The person who meets uncertainty with strategy rather than paralysis. And as you stand now, halfway between who you were and who you are becoming, you feel a quiet strength settling into your bones, a strength that doesn't need to be announced to be real, a strength that does not shout but resonates, a strength built from clarity, from discipline, from awareness, from ambition. You are beginning to see yourself not as a passive participant in the world, but as a strategist shaping your own destiny, a mindset few ever achieve, a mindset fewer ever master, a mindset Machiavelli wrote for. And as this realization settles, the darkness around you no longer feels threatening. It feels familiar. It feels like the environment where your new mind thrives. Because in the darkness, illusions die, and only truth remains. Your transformation has begun. But the real descent into Machiavelli's world has only just opened its gates. There comes a point in your evolution when the world around you begins to react to you differently. People sense a shift they cannot name, a subtle recalibration in your presence that unsettles them because it is not loud, not dramatic, not attention-seeking. It is quiet, controlled, and incomprehensibly self-contained. They feel the tension in the air when you enter a room, not because you demand authority, but because you no longer ask for permission to exist. And this alone marks the beginning of a deeper transformation, the kind Machiavelli believed only the rarest individuals ever dared to undergo. The transformation from observer to architect, from participant to strategist, from someone shaped by circumstances to someone who shapes them. Yet this transformation does not happen in a single moment. It unfolds slowly, like a shadow stretching across the floor as the sun sets. Bit by bit, piece by piece, your old patterns begin to detach from you, not through force, but through the quiet recognition that they no longer belong to the person you are becoming. It is not a painful death, but a natural one, like shedding a skin that has grown too tight, too fragile, too outdated to contain what you are expanding into. You start noticing the difference in the way you think. No longer do you rush to respond. No longer do you feel the urge to justify your choices. No longer do you allow the emotional turbulence of others to dictate your inner climate. Instead, you observe, you wait, you calculate. You let situations reveal themselves before you intervene. You act with the understanding that every choice, every silence, every gesture is part of a larger pattern, a larger strategy, a larger design. This shift is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming deliberate. It is about treating your energy as currency and spending it only where it yields influence or strength. It is about understanding that your time, your attention, your stability are assets too valuable to be given recklessly, and as you begin to guard these assets with the vigilance of a ruler protecting a kingdom, you awaken a principle Machiavelli understood intimately. Power does not begin externally. Power begins with the ability to govern yourself, because the person who cannot command their mind cannot command anything else. It is in this internal governance that the first subtle signs of your growing power become visible. You feel your emotions becoming more stable, less reactive. You feel your thoughts becoming clearer, less clouded by doubt or insecurity. You feel your instincts sharpening, your choices becoming more intentional. You feel the emergence of a new kind of patience, not the patience of resignation but the patience of strategy, an awareness that timing is an ally, not an enemy. And as this inner stability grows, you notice how easily people reveal themselves to you. You no longer speak impulsively, and your silence becomes a mirror that forces others to fill the void with their truths. They tell you their insecurities, their motives, their desires, their fears, sometimes without realizing the extent of what they are confessing. For silence is not passive. Silence is extraction. Silence is revelation. Silence is a test that most people fail because they cannot bear the weight of what it reflects back at them. You begin to see that human beings are not complicated, they are predictable. They crave validation. They fear exclusion. They desire approval. They mimic confidence. They worship power. They sabotage out of insecurity. They betray out of convenience. They pretend to be moral until morality conflicts with their interests. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone, and you, now stepping deeper into this hidden understanding, begin to navigate people not by who they pretend to be, but by the underlying motives that drive them. This vision, this psychological X-ray, grows sharper every day. You sense envy before it manifests. You detect deceit in the subtle shift of a tone. You notice hidden competition in a smile that lingers too long. You interpret the meaning behind the hesitation, the motive buried beneath a compliment, the desperation hiding behind defensiveness. You stop taking words at face value. You start studying behavior, because behavior never lies. This awareness is liberating but also isolating. You no longer trust easily, not out of cynicism but out of clarity. You no longer share your inner world freely because you recognize that vulnerability is a currency, and not everyone deserves access to its vault. You no longer confuse kindness with loyalty or familiarity with trust. Instead, you choose selectively, intentionally, strategically, and it is here, within this selective exposure, that you discover the next layer of Machiavellian insight. Control is not about domination. Control is about influence. And influence requires composure. A composed mind is untouchable. A composed mind cannot be manipulated. A composed mind intimidates without effort. A composed mind sees everything, reacts to nothing, and chooses responses from strength rather than fear. You begin to embody this composure. It appears in the way you hold your gaze a second longer than before. It appears in the way your voice stays calm even when provoked. It appears in the way you move with intention instead of haste. It appears in the way your decisions are made without asking others for permission or approval. With composure comes something even more formidable: emotional autonomy. You no longer give people the power to destabilize you. You no longer allow their opinions to shape your identity. You no longer absorb their moods, their expectations, their projections. You stand sovereign within yourself. This sovereignty is subtle at first, but others feel it like a shift in gravity. Some admire it, some envy it, some fear it, some attempt to break it, but their reactions no longer control you because you understand something deeper. People do not resist your power, they resist the reflection of their own weakness. Machiavelli observed that men are quick to resent those who force them to confront their inadequacies. Strength is often mistaken for threat because it exposes the fragile foundation of those who pretend to possess it. When you begin to rise, you unintentionally cast shadows on those who have stood comfortably in the light of mediocrity. And those shadows awaken resentment in hearts that once seemed harmless. But this resentment does not deter you, it informs you. It teaches you who cannot handle your evolution. It reveals who saw you only as long as you remained small. It exposes who respected you for your potential versus who liked you because you posed no threat. It is here, in the growing distance between who you were and who you are becoming, that you encounter the next truth. Machiavelli understood power transforms relationships, not because you change your loyalty, but because others change their perception of you. Some grow closer because they feel aligned with your strength. Some pull away because they sense their own insignificance. Some attempt to challenge you in subtle ways, testing whether your confidence is real or imagined. Some double their efforts to keep you complacent, hoping your growth is temporary. You begin to see these dynamics with startling clarity. You begin to understand that loyalty rooted in comfort dissolves when comfort is threatened. Loyalty rooted in dependency dissolves when you become independent. Loyalty rooted in admiration evolves into envy when admiration is no longer reciprocated. Machiavelli knew that loyalty must be built on aligned interests, not sentiment. And you begin to restructure the architecture of your relationships accordingly. You distance yourself from those who drain, distract, diminish, or destabilize. You draw closer to those who challenge you, strengthen you, refine you. You value truth over comfort, growth over familiarity, progress over nostalgia. And with these adjustments comes a new level of clarity. Solitude is not a weakness. Solitude is strategy. Because in solitude, your mind becomes sharper. Your vision expands, your priorities realign, your focus intensifies. Solitude is where leaders are sculpted, where ambition is fed, where strategy is crafted. Machiavelli understood that the most powerful minds often spent long periods alone, not because they lacked connection, but because they guarded their growth from the noise of those who feared it. In your solitude, you feel yourself evolving. You feel your thoughts becoming bolder. You feel your ambitions rising without apology. You feel the weight of old insecurities fading. You feel your confidence rooted not in validation, but in clarity. This is the stage of transformation where your identity begins to settle into its new form, not the soft version others preferred, but the strong version you were always meant to become. And then, as your self-governance solidifies, something else begins to rise, something more dangerous, more powerful, and more deeply aligned with Machiavelli's philosophy, the understanding that power is not taken through force, it is taken through positioning. Positioning is the art of being exactly where opportunity appears, the art of making yourself difficult to replace, the art of becoming the person people rely on but never fully understand, the art of remaining essential but elusive, present but unpredictable, visible but unreadable. This positioning is not achieved through arrogance but through precision. You show value where value matters. You speak in moments that hold weight. You disappear when presence would weaken your position. You stay silent when speaking would reveal too much. You observe when others rush. You wait while others panic. In this positioning, you begin to feel a new kind of control, not over others, but over your influence. You see how people look to you for direction without realizing they are doing it. You notice how your silence draws attention. You see how your opinions carry more weight because you do not offer them cheaply. You realize that your presence alone has become a signal, a force, a recalibration of the dynamics around you. This is when you touch the threshold of true power, not the power of dominance, but the power of gravity, the power that pulls without force, that influences without begging, that commands without imposing. And as you reach this threshold, a final truth begins to whisper through your thoughts, a truth Machiavelli embedded beneath all his teachings. Power is not something you hold. Power is something you become. It is not a crown worn on the head, but a state of mind forged through clarity, discipline, courage, and strategic intelligence. It is not given by others, but shaped by the choices you make in silence. It is not displayed loudly, but carried quietly in the way you walk, speak, decide, and think. Your transformation is no longer theoretical. It is no longer something you are learning. It is something you are embodying. You feel it every time you keep your composure when someone tries to provoke you. You feel it every time you choose strategy over reaction. You feel it every time you walk away from what once controlled you. You feel it every time you withhold what others expect from you. You feel it every time you say less and observe more. You are becoming the kind of person people cannot easily interpret, the kind of person they speak about in lowered voices, the kind of person they respect even when they do not understand. Why? The kind of person Machiavelli believed possessed true virtue, the combination of strength, intelligence, discipline, and adaptability that bends the world to one's will. Your mind is sharpening, your presence is deepening, your power is crystallizing. And yet this is only the midpoint of your descent into Machiavelli's domain. The shadows still hold more truths, the depths still hold more strategies, the darkness still holds more revelations. You are no longer merely learning, you are transforming, you are changing shape. You are stepping into a version of yourself that frightens the weak and inspires the strong. But the path ahead will take you even deeper, into the parts of human nature most deny, into the layers of strategy most fear, into the truths of power most never dare to see, and you are ready to go further, ready to step beyond the edge, ready to learn what only the dangerous ever learn. The descent continues, the shadows open wider, and Machiavelli's voice beckons you forward. If you feel the world trembling beneath your feet, it is only because you are finally beginning to understand how fragile everything truly is. Nothing is stable, nothing is fixed, nothing is guaranteed. Not loyalty, not morality, not human nature, not even your own identity. You walk through life like a figure cut from mist, shaped by the forces around you, reshaped by every pressure and every shadow that leans close enough to whisper in your ear. But this is where power begins, not in certainty, but in the chilling recognition that everything can be broken, remade, redirected, consumed. And as the night stretched further across the path before you, you began to sense the outline of something darker rising within, something that had been waiting patiently in silence. The Machiavellian truth that your evolution depends entirely on how willing you are to confront the storms inside you. In the aftermath of the revelations that had split your understanding open like a fault line, you felt your perception sharpen into something colder, clearer, almost predatory. You began to see people not as they appeared, but as they behaved when they thought no one was watching. Their smiles shifted into subtle masks, their words took on a double edge, their warmth began to feel like the heat of a candle just before it burns. And perhaps the most unsettling discovery was that you no longer reacted with surprise. You reacted with awareness, with calculation, with a growing sense that this was always the nature of the world. You had simply been too innocent to see it before. Machiavelli would have told you this innocence was never a virtue. It was an opening, a vulnerability, an exposed neck waiting for a blade. He would have told you that people carve their intentions into the world, not with honesty, but with strategy, and only those who study the shifting currents beneath their actions can navigate their moves without becoming prey. And so your transformation deepened, not with anger, but with a quiet, disciplined acceptance. That power is not merely about rising, it is about not being destroyed in the process. The world around you shifted under this new lens. Conversations took on new meanings, pauses became revelations, and every gesture became a clue. You noticed how people were drawn to strength, but comforted by softness, how they admired dominance, but sought tenderness, how they feared intelligence, but exploited kindness. The contradictions were everywhere, and once you saw them, you could not unsee them. They formed a map, not of morality but of behavior, of patterns, of predictable vulnerabilities. And as you traced that map with your mind, you realized it was not the world that had changed. It was you. Yet transformation always comes with a price, and yours arrived in the form of a silence so heavy it felt like a hand on your throat. It was the silence you encountered when you began pulling back from the familiar, when you stopped letting people take advantage of your empathy, when you no longer entertained their manipulations with polite smiles. They sensed the shift long before you understood its full magnitude. They felt your emotional temperature drop, your boundaries fortify, your focus sharpen into something almost unsettling in its clarity. And because people fear what they cannot control, they began to fear you. You did not intend to become unpredictable, but that is the paradox of growth. The moment you stop being manageable, you become dangerous. And so you continued forward, not by abandoning your humanity, but by refining it, carving away the softness that others mistook for permission, sharpening the edges they had once used as handles to pull you in whatever direction suited them. You began to speak with fewer words, observe with more intensity, act with more intention. You stopped asking for understanding. You began watching who offered it freely, who withheld it strategically, who weaponized it silently. In this darkness, you discovered something profound. Manipulation is not always an attack. Sometimes it is a shield, sometimes it is a strategy. Sometimes it is the only language certain people understand, the only method to maintain equilibrium with those who smile while plotting beneath the surface. You realize that being good was often an invitation to be used, while being aware was a signal that you could not be handled. And from that awareness grew a strange, almost unsettling calm, the calm of someone who had learned to live without illusions. But Machiavelli would remind you that awareness alone is not enough. To navigate power, you must learn how to move in the shadows without losing yourself in them. You must understand that people are not drawn to truth. They are drawn to what truth looks like when wrapped in confidence, poise, and controlled emotion. So you began to cultivate these qualities not as performances, but as tools, your voice steadier, your expression unreadable, your presence anchored in quiet intensity. It was during this time that you began to notice the subtle shift in how others perceived you. Some grew cautious, unsure of where they stood with you. Others became curious, sensing the emergence of a depth they could not quite identify but wanted to explore. And then there were those who felt threatened, though they could never articulate why, feeling only the primal unease that comes when someone they underestimated suddenly steps into their true intelligence. You did not react to any of this. You let their responses reveal their nature, knowing that people tell you everything when they believe you are watching nothing. As you observed them navigate change, you began to understand influence in a new way, not as control, but as gravitational force. Influence is not something you impose, it is something you become. When you cultivate depth, people feel it. When you cultivate strength, people respect it. When you cultivate presence, people follow it. And when you cultivate silence, people fill it with their own truths, revealing themselves in the echoes. You learned that silence is sometimes more powerful than speech, that stillness can be a form of dominance, and that patience is often the deadliest form of strategy. There were moments, however, when you felt the remnants of your old self flicker in your chest, the softness, the empathy, the instinct to trust, the desire to believe in the good intentions of others. But each time, the memory of past betrayals pressed against your ribs like a blade, reminding you that trust is not a gift, but a calculated risk, that empathy must be protected with boundaries, that loyalty must be tested, not assumed. And so you held your softness not in the open, but like a hidden flame, shielding it from the wind of others' agendas. The inner conflict was real, the tension between who you once were and who you were becoming. But that tension was also the birthplace of strength. Machiavelli would have told you that power is rarely found in those who move without doubt. It is found in those who understand their doubt, confront it, and master it. So you let the contradictions within you coexist, knowing they would forge something stronger than blind confidence, self-awareness. The kind of awareness that allows you to act with precision while others flail in emotional chaos. As your understanding of human nature deepened, so did your ability to anticipate behavior. You saw patterns unfold like blueprints: who would betray first, who would crumble under pressure, who would cling to you out of insecurity, who would attempt to control you out of fear. And with each realization, you felt a subtle shift, not arrogance, but competence. The quiet conviction that you were no longer walking through the world unaware of the traps beneath your feet. This was when the transformation turned internal. You began to treat your mind as a fortress, reinforcing its walls with discipline, sharpening its defenses with detachment, strengthening its foundations with reflection. You realized that most people's downfall was not their enemies, but their lack of internal order, their impulses, their emotional reactivity, their inability to see beyond the immediate moment. But you learned to hold distance within your thoughts, to analyze before reacting, to observe before assuming. You became patient, calculating, poised. You learned how to bend time mentally, slowing down your interpretation of events so that you could see what others rushed through blindly. And in that mental stillness, you discovered that intelligence is not speed, it is clarity. The clarity to see through facades, through motives, through desires disguised as kindness. You began to question every smile, not with cynicism, but with curiosity. You began to dissect every interaction, not with paranoia, but with precision. You observed how people unconsciously reveal their weaknesses, how they telegraph their intentions, how they attempt to gain leverage through emotion, how they hide insecurity beneath ego. And with each observation you grew sharper, more grounded, more impossible to manipulate. Yet the most important realization came when you saw that power is not merely about understanding others, it is about understanding yourself. To control your world, you must first control your inner storms. So you turned inward, exploring the shadows of your own mind with the same intensity you once reserved for analyzing the world. You confronted your fears, your desires, your wounds, your ambitions. You studied the parts of yourself you once avoided, the emotions you buried, the impulses you denied. And in doing so, you discovered that the mind is not a battlefield to be feared, but a landscape to be mastered. This mastery did not come from suppression, but from transformation. You learned how to convert your anger into strategy, your pain into insight, your loneliness into focus, your confusion into clarity. You learned that emotional energy is not meant to be extinguished, but redirected, refined, channeled into something that strengthens you rather than weakens you. And as you reshaped your inner world, you felt an unfamiliar sensation rising within you, not peace, but command. The command over your own reactions, your own decisions, your own narrative. It was in this moment that you understood one of Machiavelli's most piercing truths: the person who governs themselves cannot easily be governed by others. And with that understanding came a freedom so profound, it felt dangerous. You were no longer moved by the validation of others, no longer destabilized by their withdrawal, no longer manipulated by their approval. You began to act not from emotion, but from intention, not from desire to be liked, but from desire to be effective, not from fear of loss, but from clarity of purpose. This clarity cast a new light on everything around you. You began noticing the small cracks in people's carefully constructed personas, the insecurities they masked with arrogance, the loneliness they hid beneath bravado, the envy they concealed with forced encouragement. You saw how often people pretended to be confident but secretly feared irrelevance, how they pretended to be kind but secretly sought leverage, how they pretended to be strong but secretly felt fragile. And in seeing these truths, you no longer felt intimidated by anyone. You felt informed. This did not make you cruel, it made you strategic. You learned when to reveal your thoughts and when to remain silent, when to offer kindness and when to withhold it, when to give trust and when to test it. You became deliberate with your energy, selective with your connections, precise with your presence. And in that precision, you found a strength that was not loud, but unbreakable. Yet even as this new version of you solidified, the world continued to test your resolve. People sensed the change and reacted in ways that exposed their motives. Some tried to reassert control through guilt, others through flattery, others through sudden emotional closeness. But you saw through each tactic with a clarity that felt almost supernatural. Their attempts no longer struck you, they instructed you. They became chapters in a growing internal archive of human behavior, a compendium of patterns you could navigate with increasing precision. And slowly, you realized that the darkness you once feared was not a void meant to consume you. It was a realm meant to be explored, understood, and mastered. It was a space where illusions dissolved, where truth surfaced, where strength was forged. The darkness was not your enemy, it was your teacher. And as you stood deeper within it now, more aware, more grounded, more dangerously intelligent than ever before, you felt the weight of the world ease from your shoulders. Not because it had grown lighter, but because you had grown stronger. There comes a moment in every transformation when the ground beneath you is no longer familiar, when the person you once were is so distant that recalling their thoughts feels like listening to an old recording distorted by time. Somewhere along the path, you shed your previous softness, your unquestioning trust, your instinct to explain yourself to those who had no intention of understanding you. And now, as you stand deeper within the unfolding architecture of your own evolution, you begin to sense something strange rising within you, a sense of detachment so serene, so unwavering, it borders on frightening. But it is not numbness. You were no longer a lantern burning for anyone who approached. You became a controlled flame, small to some, blinding to others, untouchable to all who came without respect. You realized that those who once treated you carelessly were beginning to sense the change like a temperature drop in the air. They felt the loss of access long before they admitted it. Some grew resentful, others grew unbearably polite. Some attempted to pull you back with nostalgia, others tried to provoke a reaction just to see if they still had influence. But every attempt only revealed the same truth. People do not fear losing you. They fear losing the version of you they could use. This understanding did not fill you with anger. It filled you with accuracy, and accuracy is the birthplace of power. Machiavelli would have told you that emotional clarity is more lethal than emotional detachment. Anyone can distance themselves. The strong learn how to see with cold precision while still feeling deeply. That is the balance you were now beginning to master. You still felt empathy, still felt connection, still felt longing, but you no longer allowed those emotions to cloud your judgment or sabotage your boundaries. Instead, you held them like a sharp blade, carefully, deliberately, with full awareness of the damage they could cause if handled without discipline. And while you refined this internal weapon, the world around you continued to move with its usual unpredictability. People lied with casual ease. They spoke of loyalty while breaking it in the same breath. They offered affection only when convenient. They wore kindness like clothing, slipping it on only when it benefited them. But you were no longer disturbed by this. It no longer felt like betrayal. It felt like data. Every inconsistency became a pattern. Every broken promise became a case study. Every act of deceit became a lesson. You no longer took anything personally, you took it strategically. This shift in perspective made you dangerous in a way that few understood. You became someone who could listen without absorbing, observe without reacting, speak without revealing, choose without hesitation. You became the kind of person who made others uneasy without raising your voice, who drew attention without seeking it, who commanded respect without demanding it. People could feel it, the gravity of your presence, the sharpness of your mind, the quiet storm gathering behind your eyes. They sensed that something inside you had changed in a way that could not be undone. But there is a cost to this kind of awareness. The more you understood humanity, the more difficult it became to interact with it blindly. You could no longer hear compliments without questioning their purpose. You could no longer accept apologies without assessing their sincerity. You could no longer trust promises without measuring the actions that followed. This did not make you cynical, it made you wise. Wisdom is simply the ability to see without distortion. And with this new clarity, you began to move through the world with a confidence that felt almost eerie, not loud, not boastful, but grounded, silent, immovable. It was around this time that you began to understand one of the most unsettling truths of all. Most people do not live their lives intentionally. They live through habits, impulses, inherited beliefs, unexamined fears, unhealed wounds. They react more than they choose. They repeat more than they change. They follow more than they lead. And because of this, those who cultivate intention, true intention, become powerful in ways that defy ordinary comprehension. Your mind became more focused. Your decisions became cleaner. Your self-respect became non-negotiable. You began to think in terms of results, not validation, of progress, not approval, of direction, not distraction. You became someone who moved with purpose, someone who weighed consequences like a strategist studying a battlefield. And the more disciplined your thoughts became, the more disciplined your life became in return. This discipline extended to your emotions as well. You no longer allowed anger to consume you. You used it to illuminate boundaries that needed strengthening. You no longer allowed sadness to break you. You used it to understand what connections deserve to die. You no longer allowed disappointment to derail you. You used it to recalibrate your expectations. You learned to sit with your emotions without being ruled by them, to embrace their depth without drowning in their waves. This emotional control was not coldness, it was sovereignty. You became the ruler of an internal kingdom that once existed in disarray. Your thoughts bowed to order, your impulses answered to discipline, your fears kneeled before courage, your desires stood in formation, no longer scattered across a battlefield of confusion. And in achieving this inner hierarchy, you discovered a truth Machiavelli knew well. The person who controls their own mind becomes immune to the mind games of others. And so your interactions began to shift dramatically. You no longer felt intimidated by those who raised their voices. You no longer felt threatened by those who postured with confidence they did not possess. You no longer felt pressured by those who tried to push your boundaries. None of their tactics reached you anymore. They felt like arrows shot into the armor of someone who had outgrown the need for external validation. And when people realized that their usual methods no longer worked on you, their behavior changed in one of two ways. They either respected you or feared you. Both responses were acceptable. You noticed that some began to speak to you with newfound caution, choosing their words carefully, testing their tone before committing to it. Others sought your approval more aggressively, sensing that you were no longer someone who offered it freely. A few became defensive, projecting their insecurities onto you simply because your presence reminded them of everything they lacked. But the most interesting reactions came from those who suddenly wanted to be close to you again, the ones who had once overlooked you, underestimated you, or used you. They appeared with soft words and nostalgic memories, as if hoping the past version of you still lived somewhere inside your chest. But you had outgrown the places they once knew, and though they could not articulate why, they could feel it. The emotional temperature around you had changed. You carried yourself differently. You spoke differently. Even your silence felt different. It carried weight. It created a natural defense system built not from hostility, but from discernment. You no longer hid behind walls. You navigated through doors, choosing who entered, who stayed, who left, and who never even approached. The world around you began to adjust to this new version of you. And in that adjustment lay another profound insight. Power does not require domination. It requires consistency. When your boundaries remained firm, people learned to respect them. When your standards remained high, people learned to rise or leave. When your emotions remained controlled, people learned to approach carefully. You realize that the most powerful form of influence is not force, it is expectation. And yet, beneath all this transformation, something deeper was occurring in the quiet chambers of your mind. You were not only becoming more strategic, you were becoming more self-aware. You began to see the layers of your ambition with frightening clarity. You realized that your hunger for growth was not merely intellectual, it was primal. It came from a place in your soul that refused to remain ordinary, that refused to die in the shadows of potential, that refused to settle for a life dictated by the limitations of others. This ambition was not arrogance, it was destiny. And destiny, once awakened, becomes impossible to silence. It pulled you forward in ways you could not fully articulate. It made you restless, focused, relentless. It made you crave environments where your intelligence could breathe, where your discipline could sharpen, where your power could evolve unchecked. You no longer wanted to simply survive the world, you wanted to navigate it like a master playing the long game. You wanted to align yourself with people who thought in decades, not days, in strategy, not impulse, in legacy, not convenience. This desire for alignment became one of your greatest filters. You no longer sought companionship, you sought compatibility. You no longer sought attention, you sought resonance. You no longer sought comfort, you sought elevation. And as you embraced this new standard, you found something astonishing. You were no longer chasing opportunities. Opportunities were beginning to chase you. And yet, you did not become arrogant. You stayed observant, steady, grounded. You remembered the mistakes that shaped you, the illusions that blinded you, the betrayals that awakened you. These memories did not break you, they became reference points. They became reminders of how far you had come, how much you had endured, how deeply you had evolved. And in that remembrance, you carried yourself with the kind of confidence that does not need to be spoken aloud, the kind that is felt in the room long before you say a single word. It was here, standing in the quiet center of your transformation, that you finally understood one of Machiavelli's most profound, most dangerous truths. The world is not kind to the unprepared. It rewards the disciplined. It elevates the strategic. It respects the resilient. And it fears the truly self-aware. And now, you had become all three. You feel it before you understand it. A shift, subtle at first, then unmistakable, like a tide turning beneath the surface of your life. It is not the world changing. It is not fate arranging itself in your favor. It is you. You have become something different, something sharper, something more formidable than the person who began this journey. The shadows that once intimidated you now bow to your presence. The voices that once dictated your choices now fade beneath the weight of your self-command. You stand in a space carved not from accident but from intention, from discipline, from the relentless refusal to remain who you once were. But evolution is not simply a transformation, it is a reckoning. It demands that you look back at the ruins of your past self and ask the question you once feared: who am I now that I have learned how power moves? Who am I now that I see the truth behind people's motives? Who am I now that the illusions I once clung to have dissolved into cold clarity? And in that question, you understand something extraordinary. You did not simply grow, you rose. Machiavelli would say that rising is not an act of self-improvement, it is an act of self-construction. You did not stumble into strength, you built it with your own hands, forged it from your own wounds, assembled it from the remains of who you used to be. Now, you walk with a gravity that others can feel even if they cannot explain it. Your silence carries weight. Your presence bends the emotional temperature of a room. Your eyes hold a depth that makes the manipulative hesitate, the weak linger, the insecure retreat. You are not cruel, but you are no longer accessible to those who approach without intention, without respect, without substance. People sense this boundary instinctively, the same way they sense the edge of a blade without needing to touch it. And yet there is no arrogance in you, only steadiness, the quiet steadiness of someone who has endured enough storms to no longer fear the rain, but transformation always summons a new layer of darkness, not because darkness is evil, but because truth does not exist in the comfort of lies. So now, in this final descent into your own depths, you stand before the greatest revelation of all. Power is not found in controlling others. It is found in controlling the terms under which they may affect you. That is what makes you ungovernable. That is what makes you sovereign. You no longer need to dominate, because influence has become a natural consequence of your clarity. You no longer cling to people, because attachment has been replaced by discernment. You no longer justify your decisions, because you have learned that explanation is the currency of the insecure. And this stability, this rare, dangerous stability, reshapes everything. You begin to move differently, the way predators move when they no longer need to announce their presence. Your steps become measured, purposeful, unconcerned with the noise others make. You no longer rush, you no longer chase, you no longer rise to every provocation. People who once manipulated you discover that their techniques no longer land. People who once underestimated you realize they misread your silence for softness. People who once used you find themselves unable to access the version of you they once exploited. And in the quiet that follows this shift, you learn something exquisite. It is not revenge that satisfies, it is indifference. The refusal to engage with those who once drained your strength becomes its own form of victory. You do not need to confront them, expose them, retaliate against them. Your evolution itself becomes the confrontation. Your absence becomes the consequence. Your calm becomes the retaliation. The distance you hold becomes the lesson. Yet even in this new state, the world continues to test you, not with enemies, but with temptations. The temptation to return to old patterns, the temptation to prove yourself to people unworthy of witnessing your growth, the temptation to dilute your standards in the name of companionship. But you resist, not out of coldness, but out of recognition. You recognize the cost of lowering yourself. You recognize the danger of giving old wounds fresh access. You recognize the value of the person you have become. And so you become selective with who you allow near the architecture of your mind. You no longer confuse proximity with intimacy. You no longer accept apologies from the unrepentant. You no longer confuse familiarity with loyalty. You no longer chase affection dressed in temporary warmth. Your heart is no longer a battlefield for the careless. It has become a citadel for the worthy. This is where many falter, at the edge of their own greatness, afraid to step fully into the version of themselves that demands a different caliber of life. But you do not falter. You feel something waking inside you, something ancient, something resolute, the refusal to betray yourself ever again. The world may not understand this recalibration, But that is because the world thrives on people remaining predictable, controllable, emotionally malleable. But you are no longer any of those things. You are becoming untouchable in the most Machiavellian sense, not unreachable but unmanipulable. And while the world adjusts to this change, something else emerges in the silence between your thoughts, a hunger. Not for chaos, not for destruction, not for dominance, but for creation, for building a life with intention, for constructing a future with strategy, for shaping your identity with precision. You begin to crave environments where your intelligence is not an inconvenience, but an asset. You begin to crave relationships where your depth is not too much, but exactly enough. You begin to crave challenges that sharpen rather than drain you. You begin to crave goals that require the version of you that once felt impossible. But with this hunger comes another truth, the understanding that greatness is not spontaneous. It requires decision. It requires sacrifice. It requires the willingness to abandon the comfort of the familiar in exchange for the uncertainty of expansion. Most people avoid this. Most choose comfort over evolution. Most choose validation over growth. Most choose illusion over truth. But you are no longer built for that kind of life. The person you have become cannot shrink back into mediocrity. The mind you have forged cannot pretend to be unaware. The awareness you now possess cannot be unlearned. You are standing at the threshold of something larger, something more demanding, something ruthless in its potential. And this time you are prepared. You understand now that opportunity does not arrive with gentle invitations. It arrives disguised as fear, as challenge, as uncertainty. It arrives in the form of decisions that stretch you, pull you, test you. And yet beneath the fear, beneath the pressure, beneath the unknown, lies the same quiet, undeniable voice. You are ready. And perhaps that is the greatest transformation of all, the moment you finally believe in the magnitude of what you are capable of. But belief alone is not enough. Awareness alone is not enough. Strength alone is not enough. There comes a moment when the path forward demands action, decisive, unapologetic, relentless action, the kind of action that reshapes the trajectory of your life, the kind that forces the world to adjust to you instead of the other way around, the kind that declares silently but powerfully, I am no longer who I was, and I will never be that person again. This is that moment. You stand at the end of a psychological descent that has stripped you of illusions, sharpened your perception, fortified your boundaries, disciplined your emotions, and awakened your ambition. You have walked through the internal darkness that destroys the weak and forges the strong. You have confronted the truths most people run from. You have learned to see the world not as it pretends to be, but as it truly is. And now, with the full force of your intelligence, your awareness, your resilience, you face a choice: remain in this new state as an observer, or step forward as a creator. And so, hear these next words not as a whisper, but as a command rising from the depths of everything you have survived. Do not go back to who you were. Do not dim the light you fought to ignite. Do not shrink your mind to fit inside the comfort of others. Do not apologize for the power you have earned. Do not betray the self you have finally become. Rise with intention, speak with precision, act with strategy, move with purpose. Protect your evolution with a ferocity that borders on sacred, because the world will not hand you greatness. It will not grant you respect. It will not gift you clarity. These things must be taken, deliberately, intelligently, unapologetically. So take them. This is your moment to step fully into the version of yourself that terrifies the world, not because you are cruel, but because you are awake, not because you dominate, but because you cannot be controlled, not because you seek power, but because you embody it. Now go forward and become the most dangerously intelligent version of yourself the world has ever seen.